Today on Interview 360, the science in science fiction, movies, television shows, and video games. And as some have successfully pointed out, sometimes the lack of science in some of our favorite sci-fi dramas. Our guest today has fun explaining, questioning, and theorizing about the concepts in Star Trek and Star Wars and all of the science and technobabble used in galaxies far, far away. Dr. Erin MacDonald is here. She is an astrophysicist, science fiction consultant, educator, and the host of her own online series called Dr. Erin Explains the Universe. Dr. Erin, good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, it's a pleasure.
And it seems that science informs science fiction and vice versa, right? Science fiction informs and inspires science.
Absolutely. I think it's definitely a back and forth. There's this beautiful relationship that science and science fiction has. We talk about how you can go back and watch science fiction like Star Trek, the original series in the 60s, and communicators and view screens, and all of that stuff is not science fiction anymore. Not to mention that it inspired a lot of scientists to get into their field.
That's where the movies come in, and that's a lot of what you do is you take the concepts of movies and explain them or kind of go, no, that concept, no, that doesn't work. You can't quite do that.
This is a teaching moment.
Yes.
Yeah, it doesn't work, but this is why it doesn't work. So
you give a lot of credit to the movie The Martian.
The Martian is a perfect example of science and science fiction because the book itself, as well as the movie, have a lot of really sort of near-term science in the science fiction, but you always do have to find that balance of storytelling and science. And The Martian is a perfect example of that because right out of the bat, there's a giant science violation, which is the fact that there's a windstorm. And I'm not spoiling anything because this is 30 seconds into the movie,
right.
But the idea is that we know there are dust storms on Mars. We've heard this, we see this all the time. You know, it's Opportunity, the rover up there, just kind of lost all of its power because it got stuck in a dust storm. And so we can think about those, but then we reference dust storms here, right? And you feel that pressure of the wind, and you can imagine what that would feel like. However, on Mars, the atmosphere there is only 0.6% what it is on Earth. And so you could have wind, but it wouldn't press against you. There's not enough air pressure to do it. It'll kick up dust eventually, but really it's just going to be hard to see. So the idea of something blowing over a satellite and, impaling Mark Watney is great storytelling. It's kind of the whole reason the movie exists.
It's
so
a huge
you
plot
have to
point.
let it go.
Right. It is a plot point. Yeah.
But the rest of it is great. I think once you get past that and you realize that you did have to sacrifice science for the storytelling, then you can start to, root it in a lot of real science.
The writer, I think, was an aerospace engineer?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. He was an engineer, Andy Weir. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
You consult with writers then, science fiction writers?
I do, yeah. Mostly from having done all this public speaking and, I've been doing this for about 7 or 8 years now. I've met a lot of writers as I go, and now I live in Los Angeles. And so it's the place to be for that. So as I, meet people and work on various projects, do various events, I run into writers, and sometimes they are thrilled that they have and the public is like this too, that they have an astrophysicist they can start asking questions of.
Yes.
So they say, can I have your card? I got some questions. And sometimes it's just, I have this idea. As a scientist, can you read it and make sure it doesn't make you sick to your stomach?
Does
Let me
this
know.
pass the Dr. Erin test?
Exactly. And I let a lot slide, but I will say there are some things that you see and you just go, no, shut it down. Not okay.
Was there something where you did that? Was there an example of you going,
in varying degrees,
okay.
right? Some of it, one that gets conflated all the time is something called the cosmological address. And it's, this idea, I talk about it a lot, but it's just this idea that, we are on a planet in a star system that is one of many stars in a galaxy, which is one of many galaxies in our universe. But in science fiction, they conflate galaxy and star system all the time. Star Trek takes place in our Milky Way galaxy. Star Wars takes place not in another star system, in another star system in another galaxy.
Galaxy far
away.
Right.
Yeah. And that, it does get conflated a lot. Once you notice it, you can't unnotice it. So
should mention that you are a very in-demand speaker because you use popular culture to explain scientific concepts. But you're also on a mission to have young people come to science and mathematics. How important is that to you?
It's so important. I think really science just needs to be accessible in any way it can. And if I can, sometimes you get a lot of scientists who look down on sort of not so much what I do necessarily in terms of relating the pop culture, but a lot of scientists get frustrated when you have to oversimplify, when you explain things for people who don't have that background. And that is a value in science to have, right? To be very correct and exact. But you also have to, like with the storytelling, know when to make those sacrifices and to say, yeah, there's a lot more detail, but fundamentally, this is how orbits work, right? Fundamentally, this is kind of how gravity works. And if you can picture it that way, you're 90% there. And it's really passionate, a huge passion of mine to be able to teach people that way. But another big thing is just, looking who I am, being covered in tattoos and being, sort of a youngish woman that, it's not what people expect, especially if I go to schools and they hear Dr. MacDonald's going to come teach about astrophysics. This walks in, and you can see the students perk up. It wasn't what they expected. And you see the little kid in the back who's sort of going through their grunge phase and kind of see someone like me. I go, oh, maybe I could also be a scientist and be super into heavy metal. You can do the same.
And be cool at the same time.
Yeah, right?
I mean, and most people, your PhD in general relativity and gravitational waves, most people who get this doctorate level education have a tenure track in mind at a college or university. Was it difficult to step away from academia?
Yeah.
And take this leap of, kind of a leap of faith, is it not? What you're doing now with the public speaking and...
Absolutely. It was certainly against the grain. I was forging a lot of paths where I didn't really have a lot of guidance into how to do it. Even getting into science, I just liked space. That, every 10-year-old is obsessed with space and dinosaurs. Fundamentally, they're objectively awesome. I never lost that. I wanted to study more about space. I didn't necessarily want to be a professor. I don't think I really knew what I wanted, but I just had that goal of the idea of getting a PhD seemed cool, right? For some reason in my brain, that was a cool thing to do. I stand by that. And I just enjoyed studying space. The idea that I could go to college and study space was amazing and, become some of the people that I'd looked up to. But then having kind of gone through the system, and it validated that being a professor wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do.
And while you were getting into talking about some of the folks that you looked up to, I've heard you talk about some of the reasons why you went the PhD route and the study of physics.
I liked science. My father was a scientist, but in terms of me having someone who looked like me that I could relate to, I did not have that as a guidance. I did grow up in the era of the X-Files, and I had, as a redheaded girl who was obsessed with aliens, a redheaded woman who donned a lab coat and fought aliens with science. Awesome. And that's
Dana
all
Scully.
I wanted to be. Dana Scully
Yes.
was the person I wanted to be. She was everything and anything to me. I cut my hair to look like her. I wore pantsuits at the age of like 8.
Wait, 8 years old.
I could be more like Dana Scully. I found all these pictures of me dressed up like, suit and jacket and ready to fight aliens. And but I found out that she, as a fictional character, part of her backstory was that she had done her undergraduate degree in physics, specifically doing research on Einstein. And it's a non-zero coincidence that there's a direct line from that, me, to then getting a degree in physics. And
Eureka.
when I was in graduate school, that's when I really kind of attached myself to Captain Janeway from Star Trek Voyager, because she was forging her own path, right? She was stuck in a quadrant of the galaxy no one had explored before. She's trying to get her crew home. She's a leader. She's constantly having to balance this unknown, this be professional, be lonely. And I grounded myself in that character a lot. It's important.
You talk about being wanting to be a warp drive expert.
Yeah.
Totally got my attention. So on warp drive, You do, and we'll get into the show, Dr. Erin Explains the Universe, but you talk about hyperdrive and warp drive and these things.
Yeah.
And even if they're possible. Because I think it was just dropped out there in Star Trek, and we just kind of had to accept that, we're going into warp drive.
It was in the future. We figured it out.
Yeah.
That was future our problem. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But sometimes it has to be explained, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And can it be?
It can.
Okay.
Some of it I've completely just conceptualized in my brain. Others I've not. I'm not the only one who's done it. For me, it was when I was procrastinating writing my thesis and watching a lot of Star Trek Voyager. It's like, I can calculate how warp drive works now. I'm getting my PhD in general relativity. We're doing this.
Yes, that's on.
And so that was kind of when I started giving talks at conventions as well. And so I just leaned into it because that was my expertise. I was immersed in general relativity and space-time for years. And for me, it was finally paying off. I could calculate warp drive. It's going faster than light. They have FTL for short. And so warp drive is probably one of the most famous ones, just because of the ubiquitous, presence that Star Trek has in our culture. But then we also have things like jump drives or stargates or all of those different ways.
Wormholes.
Wormholes,
right.
Yep. So what does it mean? Could they exist? Is that possible? And I'm just fascinated by it.
So I think you described the idea of getting from here to here might involve bending then. The bending of space-time, right?
Right,
okay.
That if you're here and you want to go here, one of the ways you can do it is to take that where you want to go, bend it to you, jump, and then unbend it. And that's a FTL jump drive, primarily seen in Battlestar Galactica. They do a really good job of explaining that. However, the biggest problem that we have when it comes to traveling faster than light is that bending of space-time. How do you bend space-time? Typically, we have planets or stars or neutron stars or black holes that the presence of mass bends space-time. Now, Einstein came up with another idea called energy mass equivalence, more commonly known as E equals mc squared, where every amount of mass, there is an equivalent amount of energy stored in that mass. And so part of the idea is that maybe you could use that equivalent amount of energy to bend space-time at your will and maybe build a warp bubble where you wrap space-time around your ship, because we can't travel on the surface of space-time faster than the speed of light because we have mass, but there's nothing saying that space-time itself can't go faster than the speed of light. So the warp drive is this idea that you just bend space-time around you and then that travels faster than the speed of light, and you on your ship, you're fine inside the warp bubble.
Yeah, you're just in there walking around with artificial gravity and all of the things that you have in the future.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So there's even diagrams for warp 1, warp 2, warp 3. How many warps? How many can you do?
Star Trek has always played a lot with the different types of warp that you can have. But the idea is that you bend your warp bubble, right? And then you want to go faster than that. And a way to exponentially increase your speed is to build another bubble around that. But you're exponentially increasing, and so it's going up like this, and it's going faster and faster. Eventually, you're going to get to the point where you're bending all of warp of space and time around your ship.
There's going to be a problem, right?
Which, they refer to as warp factor 10, and there's a famously terrible Voyager episode that's about that happening.
And the things that result.
The things that result, yeah.
So we're not going to go faster than warp 10.
10,
Yeah,
whatever you want to call it, but at the point where you are bending all of space and time around your ship, that's bad and hard to do.
Let's talk a little bit about Dr. Erin Explains the Universe.
Okay.
Fascinating stuff. It's really fun to watch. And
Good.
like we've said throughout this conversation, you break things down. You're talking about artificial gravity, tachyons, gravitational time dilation, space-time, FTL. I mean, you go through all of these.
Yep. Hi. This video we're going to be talking about faster than light travel, or different ways to travel around the universe that we see in science fiction, and which ones work, which ones are difficult, which ones can never happen.
It must be fun to do.
It is, and it's mostly stuff. It started because I was going to all these conventions and giving talks on, all of everything that you listed there, tachyons, artificial gravity, faster than light travel, time travel, any of those. And people wanted to show their friends or show their kids. And so that's why I started putting them into shorter videos so people could go and see them. So I, do it on my own when I've got time between my talks. So it's an irregular release schedule, but the idea is to get these ideas out there because people are interested in it. And I have found when I go to these conventions, there's just like mobs of people that have an opportunity to talk to a scientist and especially talk to someone who loves science fiction as much as they do.
And they're like, oh, I have a few questions for you. And
Yes.
they get out their sheets of, okay.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I get everything from, hey, I read an article on neutron stars. Can you explain it to me? to, I have a theory about how the universe came about. Can I explain it to you?
And they do.
And they do. And it's great. And I will sit there for as long as I can and try to engage and be available. But it's fun. And I love being able to reach young kids and inspire them. I had at a convention, I think last year, a kid who was probably about 8 came up to me and he'd watched my videos and he knew everything about like time dilation and he had really good questions. He had like his own multiverse theory. He stood up and asked a question at the end about black holes. Like, I just love being able to do that. And so even if I can just inspire one kid, that feels so good. I think it's a big onus on scientists as well to be respectful of people when they have questions because if I'm sitting at a pub or something and I'm sitting at the bar and start chatting to people and they find out what I do, and I get asked all sorts of questions, some that are simplistic, that are kind of basic astronomy questions, but they are taking a huge leap in admitting they don't know something and asking a stranger a question. And so if I were to dismiss them or make them feel dumb,
You don't want to call them out about that.
they're
No.
not going to, because they're not going to ask a scientist a question again, and they're probably going to start turning against scientists a little bit, just in their mind, because they were made to feel dumb, and no one wants to feel dumb. And so I think it's so important as
That's a really good
scientists,
point.
when we go out to communicate to people, it's such a cliche to say, but there are no dumb questions. They are asking a question. That's the important thing. And so taking it seriously, if it doesn't quite make sense, just asking to clarify. I had a woman ask me a question once, and it seemed she was genuinely confused about the moon landings. You can get into a whole world of conspiracy theories and things like that, but she just was genuinely confused about how we could have a lander on the moon and how it got off the moon. Okay,
All right.
let me explain that to you. And she was receptive, and I answered her question.
And thank you for asking.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So yeah, it's really important.
Ever want to be an astronaut?
Space is scary.
I've said this many times. It is scary.
Space is
Sigourney Weaver just killed it for me in 1979 in Aliens. No.
She killed it for a lot of people.
Yeah, I can't.
Yeah. You know what, though? Like, just the idea of being an astronaut is so cool. I think that it's one of those universally adored careers, no matter what border, culture, anything you come from. Astronauts are cool. And so the day that I qualified for the NASA astronaut program, I applied just out of principle because I finally hit all the qualifications for it. So I couldn't not. Did not make the cut. I'm fine with that.
Okay.
They can carry on and continue to do amazing things.
Awesome. Dr. Erin MacDonald, thank you for talking with us
Yes.
today. It's been a blast.
Thank you very
And
much.
Continued success.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
And definitely check out Dr. Erin Explains the Universe. You'll get hooked on it. It's well worth your time. Thank you again.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you for watching. See you back here next time. This is Interview 360.